of ridiculousness. Just go stupid with it. Yeah, it really is about that. So 10.5 then. Now we get to see how this translates socially. So we have Nietzsche's will to power. And we're looking at section 10.5 in the notes. 5. And again, we are still in disparagement of the so-called evil qualities. And we're actually only going to cover, I'm actually only going to cover 3 notes in this section. 370 to 373. So it's notes 370 to 373. Okay. So the ego and the social, right? My rather long preface was to let you know the profound genius of Friedrich Nietzsche in articulating this point. And I cannot stress how absolutely profoundly important section 10.4 and 5 of my notes are. Because for me, it's the attempt to give recognition and clear a space for what Nietzsche had seen 100 years ago. He had anticipated the state of decadence as it is in contemporary society 100 years ago. And he couldn't even have imagined how denialist of a society we have become. All infused originally from this theological denial. No one really interested in self-promotion. No one really interested in the ego. No one really singing a song of myself, as Whitman would say, right? There is none of that now, right? It's all about death and destruction, my own death, my own destruction, my inability, my lack, my, blah, blah, blah. So, first quote from note 370, Nietzsche says, quote, "The subject is only a fiction." The subject, the I, is only a fiction. The ego of which one speaks when one censures egoism does not exist at all. That's going to take a lot to unpack, right? That's one sentence is going to take quite a bit to unpack. So I'm going to go through and make sense of what he means by that, because it is far more complex than it appears. So I'll read it again, and then I'll start to unpack it. The subject is only a fiction. Okay, there really is no I. There really is no me. So when we're talking about egoism and me trumpeting my own horn, I'm really not talking about me, I. What could that mean? It sounds like a contradiction, right? How could his foundational account for morality be a recognition that egoism is going to be antithetical to Christian dogmatism, but then he says that egoism, the appearance of the subject as I, is fictional? How it doesn't make sense. It seems totally contradictory. The ego of which one speaks when one censures egoism does not exist at all. Okay, so the first bullet point is the recognition that the uncensored ego is inconceivable. This is me now. This isn't Nietzsche. But the idea to talk about I as subject, which we know he says doesn't exist, which is good. It was time to get rid of the sort of banal subject object distinction. But the first bullet point, the uncensored ego is inconceivable. What does that mean? The uncensored ego is inconceivable. Now let's look at a more advanced analysis of that, because even that requires a bit of a breakdown. All of this is, we're at that level now where it's conceptually it's most dense, right? The question is to try and make a resolution to the apparent contradiction. It's not a logical contradiction, it's an apparent contradiction between the claim that egoism is an antithetical account to the Christian dogmatic ideological framework. However, that egoistic account is itself rooted in a fictionalized distinction between I and other, right? Such that I, subject, is fictional. It seems to undermine the very nature of what it is to be an egoist. The advanced account is the ego exists to be censured. Right? This is me now, making sense of Nietzsche. The ego exists to be censured. It is the act of censuring the ego via morality and moral dogma that creates the ego. Actually, it is the ability to discover the ego, then create it. So that I don't even recognize the existence of the I until I have a force that censures my desire. And then I come to recognize the I. I come to recognize, right, and I'm not going to talk about I know I'm not going to get into the Lacanian bit. Remember, I'm not doing this from a psychological standpoint. I know enough of Lacan to know the distinction between the symbolic and the imaginary, the real, blah, 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 blah. I get a sort of general understanding of that. And I recognize the profound effect that the mirroring phase has on the cognitive development of the child. The child sees himself, herself in the mirror, comes to recognize the I, self, spatial relations. I'm not interested in any of that. I'm not discussing this in any sense with respect to any discourse on anything psychological at all. Right? This is something in and of itself. I want to define this concept independent to any of that discourse. So none of that discourse is relevant for this particular analysis that I'm doing. The analysis that I'm doing, in wholly philosophical Nietzschean sense, is an analysis that I come to recognize the I as a consequence of the denial. I want something, and there is an inability in the world for me to get that thing. Now, if you want to go infant stage, we can talk infant, but I'm less interested in that. I don't feel a need to have to prove anything. The idea, in a very sort of conceptually easily digestible sense, is that I remember being young and wanting to go out with friends, and I'm talking maybe 9 or 10, and smoke cigarettes on the corner. Right? I thought it was cool. Go out there and smoke cigarettes on the corner. And I have this desire. I'm a kid. I don't have nothing to do with my time. I have absolutely no idea of mortality. I don't have any concept of the consequences of cigarette smoking and the destruction that it does to your body and all that. Who cares? I'm a freaking 9-year-old. Who cares? It's cool. I want to smoke cigarettes. I go out to the corner. Everybody else is smoking cigarettes. And I ask one of the big boys, tap him on the leg, and I'm like, yo, let me get one of those. And he's smoking, and he looks down at me, and he says, nah, you can't have it. Denial, 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 denial. It's like a reverse Cartesian, right? It's like I come to recognize the I come to recognize who I am by the denial of my desires. I recognize power in its most primordial, in its most conceptually undeveloped sense by the fact that someone else or another institution is in a position to deny me what I want. I'm not talking about rights. It doesn't have to be a right. It's just a desire. Right? We don't have to get all fancy. I have the desire to satisfy sexual urges. I have the desire to satisfy violent urges. I have the desire to satisfy self-destructive urges. I have the desire to satisfy knowledge-based urges that motivate my action in the world. And at each attempt to satisfy that desire, at each attempt for me to think about what I want for me, there is already, in a Heideggerian sense, there's already a given space that I've been introduced into. Right? The social is given. Right? This is a social. I don't want to introduce Heidegger here, but all of this is already given. And I sort of, like, I'm deposited at birth. I'm deposited at birth into this given. But it was there before me, and it'll be there after I'm gone, right? That social nexus, if you want to talk about it linguistically, this is a social community. If you want to talk about it in a Hobbesian sense, this is the state of affairs, the moral state after the state of nature is a given. If you want to talk about it epistemologically, it is our epistemological, excuse me,